46, Alva. We humans have explored almost the entire globe, thoroughly and well, but the soul is a mystery. For the soul reflects everything, and everything must be felt. We cannot understand everything. Instead, we record our existence thoroughly and diligently, from religions to history to science and medicine. But the soul is a feeling rather than words. For me, the soul became the meaning and goal of my life, to heal it. Because my soul had been invaded by mom and dad's desires and needs, and it had buckled under the weight. Post-traumatic stress is about the psyche being taken hostage. You can never just forget and move on. The psyche must heal so that the soul can be reinstated. CPTSD, or complicated post-traumatic stress disorder, is when a person is exposed to many traumas, one after the other, without the possibility to recover in between, which applies to me. The idea is separating these traumas from the core, the self. So, when I was faced with the fact that I have DID, I was a closed world, like North Korea. My parts were countries that were isolated from each other, and high walls had been erected between them. There was no trade, no meetings, no alliances. One country made flour and nothing else, another made steel and nothing else. So all the countries were severely deficient. Thus, some felt sorrow and could paint. Some felt fear and could trust. Some felt shame and could sing. Some felt anger and had a sense of self-preservation, and so on. Some countries could cooperate when faced with a common enemy. For example, teenagers could cooperate in threatening situations. I didn't know how to heal TID. The idea that I was in pieces was terrifying, but I had to try. What else could I do? The parts were not strangers after all. I had sensed them already as a teenager, terrified of the fact that there were several people inside me. I was sitting in my apartment, 28 years old, groping for some kind of path to walk. Kira was there, but I don't know how I managed to take care of her then. Stockholm felt cold and inhospitable. I was living on benefit and had no one to turn to. I sat and looked at photographs of Elsa that I had managed to get from my mother's townhouse. Now I was open. The countries in my inner world had become aware of each other with renewed force and were studying each other beyond the walls. I was not banished by Fredrika's armor all the time, and the realization hit me and went straight in. I am a twin. That is the first and most fundamental part of my identity. Yes, there was a foundation, and I didn't know how, but I was going to clear away the debris to free it. Can you help me with a recommendation for the Social Security Office? Psychiatrist Mariska Sircik looked at me as her brain quickly connected her visual impressions to a label, an object, a boring phenomena in her stylish office. I just realized that I'm, like, in pieces, I stammered, that I've got this thing called DID, you know? She tightened up and put on a smile. Yeah, of course. I exhaled a little, glanced at Barbro, who was a woman that I had contacted during my crisis, when they, had called for help on support phone lines. Because I had asked to change doctors, for Mariska Sircik was so harsh. As soon as I said something to her in her office, she had reacted with disapproval, so I didn't feel safe. I had tried to explain, But I wasn't allowed to change doctors and had to see her now because the Social Security office was asking for a new recommendation for my benefits. I had asked Barbara to come with me, which bothered Mariska. "You're attention seeking," she growled. "Please help me." I started to cry, alone with my shattered soul. "It's nice, isn't it, to feel a little misunderstood?" she smirked. Barbara followed me out of the clinic. She had come to me like a saving angel, so bright, warm, wise, and kind. We had met every week in her office, but she had quickly become dismissive. And as I was stuck in my split, unable to do anything but fly into the clouds when one of the parts took over, and they all had different relationships with Barbara, who became angry. We disregarded glibness and accusations, as we had taken turns parrying and protecting ourselves from Mom's psychological abuse throughout childhood. "Well, sometimes someone takes over. It's not me." I tried to explain and received criticism from within as well. It sounded incredibly weird. I had a phobia of my parts, a phobia designed to strengthen the walls and protect the self. Feeling one of the parts take the helm was a terrifying experience. Disappearing into the fog, knowing that I could not control what would be said with my mouth or where my body would go, was a nightmare. We inside me were not looking for a response, a reaction, or action from the outside world. We were overwhelmed by pain and trauma. The shock of trauma had petrified us so that we were frozen at different ages and exhibited an immature emotional state. It must certainly be difficult to witness, and Barbara became critical and dismissive of me. She was not the first to reject me. Several people I had met, including Åsa, the social worker, were like copies of each other or of my mother, and it certainly felt like everything was repeating itself. "It was a great show," Barbara said to me outside Mariska's office. "Thank you for giving me a front row seat." Mariska did not confirm my need for benefit, so the social insurance office sent me to Hilding Lagerkrantz. He is our psychiatrist. He is very nice. I had to get treatment for DID, lived life in unconsciousness. This meeting was important. I had no one to help me and Kira if I lost my income. I needed to be present, to be an adult. Instead of immature Fredrika and her armor, I had a distance through silence, a protection that helped me stay in place, a wall of silence that allowed me to be present without disappearing from my body. So I wrote a long letter to Hilding Lagerkrantz, telling him about my life and difficulties. He met me with angry frustration. "If you don't speak, you can leave." My parts took over. I myself was shaking and crying downstairs after the meeting with Lagerkrantz. Christina Lindström welcomed me into her consultation room, exuding confidence that made me feel safe. But she wanted to push buttons. Vulnerability brought a devilish gleam to her eyes, and I saw it before I disappeared into the fog. I asked her if she understood. She was deeply offended and took what I told her and threw it in my face. As if it wasn't about grief, pain, vulnerability, loss. "You seek what you can never have," she said. "You've failed, haven't you, with Kira, with your education, with your siblings. If you leave me, it's only because everyone has left you." As long as I was stuck in DID, I would be drawn to the same kind of abusive people, vulnerable and unable to protect myself. That was the pattern that mom and dad had imprinted on me as DID system. I would be drawn to the same kind of people as them, albeit in an attempt to free myself, but would be torn apart all over again. The trauma treatment I needed was nowhere to be found. In December, when I turned 30, lost my benefit, had to give up Kira, for whom I could not afford to buy food, and ended up in the debt collector's office, I finally came to the crisis and trauma unit in Stockholm. Here I was met by a skilled psychologist who had knowledge of both complicated post-traumatic stress and DID, but they didn't offer any further treatment, only diagnosis and referrals. He saw me so many times that he was able to perform tests and diagnose me with DID. He was very understanding and empathetic, but after that brief contact with him, I ended back in general psychiatric care. Nini Klein hadn't quite graduated in psychology, but she became my therapist within general psychiatry. And Nini listened and listened but heard nothing. She seemed to get scared and insecure and then minimized my traumas, glossed over my grief and pain. She misunderstood my DID diagnosis, which was not generally accepted in Sweden yet. Still, she could have done a simple Google search and gotten more information. Now she treated me as if I had a personality disorder instead of a dissociative disorder. There is as much difference between the two as there is between a broken bone and muscular sclerosis. Nini Klein interpreted my dissociation as seeking validation, but in fact I was dissociating to keep everyone at a distance. She saw my anxiety as a flaw in my personality and not as the result of abuse. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the DID, the system that had become my survival during childhood but was now my prison. Relationships and betrayals were constantly repeated. When I was threatened, I disappeared into the clouds. The others took over and stayed far too long in situations and relationships that did not work. Fredrika was created precisely to take responsibility for those who hurt me. She was created to meet their needs at her own expense. There was a pattern. My emotions controlled the dissociations. The situations that resembled but were not the events that had created the dissociation or the split influenced the alternation. Trauma had created my parts, but all it took was for me to get scared, sad, or feel pressured in everyday life for an alter ego to take over. Relationships of various kinds were particularly triggering because they were full of anxiety and loaded with the betrayals I had experienced in life. As soon as an emotion became too big, I left the helm. I myself was mostly empty of emotions and mostly a brain, someone who really tried to understand. But I couldn't stay there long enough, and I seemed to get weaker the older I got, while Fredrika grew and got stronger instead. DID is the small death. I had the feeling of dying from the first time it happened, and I flew away from the situation, up against the rafters and away from Dad. So I had a kind of unspoken fear of death all the time, as much because of the dissociations as the post-traumatic fear that Dad would come and finish what he started. Ninny Klein understood nothing of what was going on inside me. I was the bird that had come out of the cage, that had finally dared to open the lock, but was now breaking its wings against the thick locked windows of the room. While sitting in therapy with Ninny Klein, I heard Frederica's frustrated voice. I want to free Alva. Chapter 46 comments. DID is triggering. I know this from my own experience, having seen someone else switch and start behaving like a small child. If you don't know what's going on, you're likely to feel both frightened and confused. So it's important to stay calm and collected. Actually, what the parts need is something that doesn't have to be that difficult. For the person they're talking to be calm, accepting, and a good listener. This is hugely healing for subpersonalities. Borderline or EIPS is a personality disorder that involves certain criteria and patterns. Mental health services have diagnosed many traumatized people who have been in acute crisis with EIPS. Imagine you had a broken leg but were diagnosed with cancer. Offensive, frightening, and harmful. For a time, there was a tendency to lump EIPS and DID together, as they were often considered to be a so-called comorbidity. Today, we have different information, and I myself see a significant difference between borderline EIPS and DID. We all have different aspects of our identity that may be more or less integrated and anchored. DID is not about uncertainty surrounding these aspects, but about having divided one's personality into several islands, each carrying a part of one's emotional life, abilities, and experiences, in order to protect oneself from an overly threatening reality. I hope to raise awareness about DID. It is rare to have true DID, but at the same time, it is unfortunately more common than one might think. Don't let what happened to me happen to anyone else.